I have two modes when I talk about this book, and we try over the course of the conversation. I'll try and bring out both of them. The first mode is angry, and the second mode is hopeful and constructive.
I'll be on the hopeful side. He'll be on the angry side. I think
it definitely made me angry consuming the content around this and the book, because it kind of. You're a professional in this space, and you just confirm everything that I feel about my life. Yeah. In as someone who I was born in Birmingham. I've lived up north. Northerners will call me a southerner. Southerners will call me a northerner. I'll identify as a northerner. I went to Durham Uni and then lived in Manchester for 10 years. So and now I live in Southport, which is right up there. Yeah. And you feel like the place is left behind.
It is,
and that's
because it is.
It is, yeah, and that's what we're going to get into today, and we're going to flesh that out and kind of your work around trying to fix that and how you hit a bit of a brick wall as well. You describe Britain as the most unequal of high income countries. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, it means something about life chances. If you're born in the right place with the right parents, then Britain is the best place in the world, because you're almost guaranteed to have a successful life. But if you're born in the wrong place with the wrong sort of parents, then your life chances are, I'm going to use a technical economics word here, your life chances are shit.
And you're not talking like, oh, my parents are rich. You're just talking in London with a university degree. That was the right. Is
Absolutely,
that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So and that's shameful. But, there are an awful lot of people in this world who didn't grow up in London. Parents didn't get a university degree, and what of them? What of them? Are they just going to be written off as doomed?
It's 90% of the UK population, surely. What's the population of London? What, 10 million or something? 9 million? I don't know. Yeah. But if there's 70 million people in the UK, you're talking the vast majority are not in London.
The vast majority are not in London.
And it's this point of, I think most people think, oh, you're talking about rich families' private education. No, you're just talking about a university degree in the centre of London. That's it. And if you're outside of London and your parents haven't got a degree, your research has shown that you've got one hand behind your back.
Absolutely. If not two, right?
Yeah.
There are these degrees of advantage. By the time we get to you've got affluent parents, then your chances of having a successful life go up massively. Roughly 70% of kids who start with affluent parents who've got a degree, they go on to a successful life. By the time, if you go to the opposite, where your parents are not at all affluent, say in the poorest fifth of the country, which is still a lot of people, right? A lot of people, we're talking many millions, more than 10 million, then your chances of making it fall quite drastically, not 70%, but 17%. Right? And then you come up to one big hurdle, which is GCSEs. Right? I've got two kids who are just in the middle of taking GCSEs at the moment. Right? It's been a nightmare. But the top third who perform well in that GCSE exam, they've got a very high chance of going on to success. Again, about 70%, right? The bottom third of young people in Britain taking those GCSE exams, their chance of ending up in the luckier half of society, their chance is 4%. So we're looking at 70% and 4%.
For a memory test. Because
that's
what
it
is.
Test,
it's a memory test.
At the age of 16.
Yeah,
But how do you define, like, just vaguely, how do you define success? Is it like buying a house, or what's it?
In that case, it's being in the top 40% of income earners by the time you're, say, 30. Right? Okay. So it's not to be in the top 40% nationwide. It's not fancy. We're not talking big money, but we're just talking, you've got a decent job.
Yeah.
the key distinction in your research that you did with the IFS was this life chances point and bringing that out as a metric. Can you flesh out what that means?
Yeah. First of all, it's very hard to do it because there isn't very good data in Britain. Why is there not good data? Because everything's been covered up, right? But yes, we've been able to calculate life chances. And what life chances mean is if you're born black in London and your parents didn't go to university, what's your chances? If you're born female in Yorkshire and your parents didn't go to university, what's your chances? And that sort of thing. So we take categories and we look at, we measure you first when you're 16 years old, and then the latest we can measure you is when you reach 28, which is still an awful lot of your future left, but we can tell even between 16 and 28, the life chances of the fortunate are vastly higher than the life chances of the unfortunate. Misfortune, the most unfortunate person group in the country we could find, is actually white. She's in Yorkshire, South Yorkshire. Her parents didn't go to university. She didn't go to university, and her chances of earning in the top 40%, forget it.
Really that low? And you're not talking massive success. You're just talking being in the top half of the distribution. It's not like, oh, you're the 1%.
No, that's right.
You're just a high rate taxpayer, maybe.
You're able to have you're able to tell yourself, that's pretty good. I'm all right. You know, it's a very modest level of success, but it's the sort of thing that somebody who's proud, works hard, everybody who tries to get a skill, works hard, should be able to succeed to that level.
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're looking at here is social mobility. And say, when we're saying that the UK is the most unequal, if we went to Spain, the people in the bottom fifth there would have a higher chance of getting into the top 40% of earners than someone in the bottom fifth of the UK.
You've got it right. You've got it right. And the gap between Lord Lucky, who's white, grew up in London, working in the city, and Misfortune, that poor young woman in the north of England, that gap is huge. It's basically 6-1 in terms of life chances. And nowhere else has that sort of inequality in life chances. We're talking about people's futures and a lack of credible hope amongst an awful lot of people.
It's horrible to hear that luck is a factor and that people have their kind of their hands tied behind their back, because I know the North to me is the best place on the planet. I know the people up there, they're great people, you know, and I've contributed what I have to the world, to the UK, and I've helped lots of people start investing, and it's how many other people are there that have got great potential that will just never be realised, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Yorkshireman, right? Yeah. So, of course, all Yorkshiremen think we're the best place on the planet. Perhaps it's not. Other people think their place is the best place on the planet, and that's great. What the characteristic is, we've got pride in a place we feel we belong.
Yeah.
Now, that's a very important commodity, that pride. People who grow up without that sense of pride, that's a tragedy. And to be honest, in a lot of the North now, life has been so demoralizing for most people for the last 30 or 40 years that they've lost that sense of pride.
Why would you be proud?
Yeah. And they feel humiliated. And from there, they start to feel angry, or even worse, they despair. And if you despair, you give up trying. And of course, if you give up trying, you fail. And then the successful people sitting in private equity or whatever say, you see, they fail because they're not trying, they're useless. Why should I help them? And that disdain, this disdain for the places that have fallen behind, that is the truly shaming thing.
Yeah, that it's their fault. I think Was it Margaret Thatcher described Liverpool as something that needed to be managed decline of the city or something like that? It was like that kind of, it's no good.
Exactly.
I mean, Liverpool's an amazing place if you go there, but it was like, this place just needs to be, it's terminal almost.
Yeah, managed decline in the place that produced the Beatles, for God's sake.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of interviews in South Yorkshire, my own region, and I've talked with teachers in poor schools. And what they say is that the narrative that kids in their school tell themselves is, well, the Southerners think we're thick, and so, okay, we're thick. Well, in that case, what's the point in trying?
Yeah.
And these are the people who, their grandparents lived in South Yorkshire, which was the inventor of the Industrial Revolution. The World Heritage Centre for the first factory on Earth. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. That's 10 miles from where I grew up. Right? So these people are the descendants of a spectacular tradition that was brilliant. The main theatre in Sheffield is called the Crucible. Why? Because the Crucible, the process of forging specialist high-quality steel, was invented in Sheffield, and it called for enormous skill. You throw a lump of iron ore into a furnace, and every lump of iron ore is slightly different chemical composition, and the skill of these people who were all around it was to see from the slight changes in the hue of the flames what was needed. No. It was real very intuitive wisdom. And it was judgment.
Yeah.
They'd not got a good education, but God, they were skilled. They knew they were skilled, and they felt pride.
It's the memory testing again, isn't it? Yeah. It's like we judge intelligence on the ability to recall what's in a book, but we don't recognise other forms of intelligence.
That's right. Yeah. There's so many routes to the top.
Yeah, you could be a musician, you could be artistic, you could be good with your hands, you could all these things that don't show up in GCSEs.
Absolutely, and so it's disgraceful that we write off basically a third of our youth with these pathetic chances when they're 16.
Before I became a finance creator, I was a sales guy. And there was nothing more annoying than when you thought you'd landed a big deal, only for it to fall through basically when the customer found something in your vendor process that your company was missing, like providing compliance, things like GDPR, ISO 27001 or SOC 2. Showing your company has top-notch security practices is now essential if you're selling to bigger companies globally or if you're in SaaS, software as a service. This is where our partner Vanta comes in. Vanta automates compliance for ISO 27001 and many other major security acronyms which prove that your company is secure. They can save you loads of time and money and have over 7,000 clients, including big names like Cora and Flow Health. If you need better security compliance to land more deals, you can get $1,000 off by heading to vanta.com/makingmoney.
You dug deep into this, and who did you find at the bottom of it?
So who's to blame, if that's the sort of the question?
Yeah.
Let's start with the fact that Britain is incredibly centralised. British finance is incredibly centralised in London.
Yeah.
It takes two forms. There's the private equity stuff. Now, what has private equity done for our country? It's not clear that it's been such a good thing, because what private equity gets its bonuses for is reshuffling ownership. So let's take the firm Cadbury's. Cadbury's, Birmingham.
Yep. Bourneville.
Very fine tradition. Yeah. It was a very pro-social firm.
Enlightened industrialistic.
Absolutely. So this was a firm with a huge pro-social tradition. Who owns Cadbury now? Cadbury was sold off by private equity to an American company, Hershey, with all sorts of promises that, we'll keep Cadbury's purpose, right? Did they?
No, of course not.
No, they didn't. Right? And so that's a train wreck of a very fine firm.
My nan worked for Cadbury's in her youth, making cream eggs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like there's such a proud tradition, and everyone lived in the houses that those guys built. They literally built like a whole town within Birmingham of houses for the workers to live in.
Why would they sell it to America though?
Because they paid the most money, and they were on a bonus. What private equity guys are on a bonus to make deals?
Yeah.
No deals, no bonus, no money. So some very successful, very rich people in London got their bonus that year out of selling on Cadbury's to America, right? And doubtless they're driving around in the Bentleys of this world. That's what they used part of their bonus to buy, I guess. So it's very productive if we measure it in terms of income, but it's not socially useful. In that case, it was socially quite damaging. So that's part of finance in London. Then there's another part which is better, which is finance, risk-taking finance called venture capital.
That's what I work in.
Venture capital is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Because it invests in the small companies, small and medium companies that are going to be growth, and a few of those small and medium companies will grow to be the future.
Yeah.
So that's a thoroughly good thing. The trouble with venture capital, which is also entirely centred in London, is that they don't go very far north of London.
Like 70% in London, the businesses they invest in.
That's right. 70% of all the venture capital is invested in London and the southeast. Well, that isn't 70% of the population, but it will be 70% of the future economy unless we're careful.
And I think each place has its unique problems. So the businesses that are born and the ideas that come out of a city are born of the problems of that place. And London has big problems with property and stuff that might not be that relatable for the north of England in a lot of ways. You pointed to that. I mean, I know cities are expensive, but you're probably discrediting a lot of good ideas up north, by not
Definitely. But like the time I earned the most and I had the most disposable income was when I was living in Manchester, but I was working remotely. So I was being paid like a London salary in Manchester. And then I could see, I can afford to buy a house here. But now, even though we've got the advantage, my parents went to university, I was born in London. Me and the majority of my London friends do not own or are not looking to buy property. Whereas my friends who live outside London, a lot of them own. I have a few friends that own property, but the majority of them don't.
Yeah,
so it doesn't feel like an advantage
when
everything is so expensive for us. It doesn't feel like an advantage. And then having lived in Manchester and lived in Durham, comparing the property prices and rent, it's ridiculous how much more you pay to live in London. And then you can't afford a house, so you're just paying someone else's mortgage.
That's right.
So it's not always advantage to...
Who's won from that is different generations come out better or worse. The top generation is my generation.
Yes.
We were born in the 1950s, and we had it made.
Yeah.
It was a land of opportunity. Unfortunately, if we take every decade after the 50s, you're born in the 60s, your chances at the same age are worse than if you were born in the 50s. If you're born in the 70s, chances are worse than if you're born in the 60s. 80s, chances worse than in the 70s. 90s, chances worse than if you're... So every damn decade, your chances of owning a house have gone down. And as you just said, it poses a choice. Either you leave the place where you belong, in London, or you get a house, but not both. And people from the north face the same agony. They either leave the place where they belong to get a job opportunity, the sort that you've got, or you get a house.
Yeah.
Because the houses up north are cheap. Why are the houses cheap up north? Because there are no opportunities to earn a decent income. And that's the bitter reality, and it's totally avoidable. How did it happen? By the utter neglect of places outside the magic circle of London, Oxford, Cambridge, the Southeast. So we need to spread private equity, but above all, we need to spread the power of decision in government to change the policies that are being adopted. Right? So my next advice is, if you feel this is shit, how do we change it? Then I've got some very specific advice for both of you. Right? Because British public policy is run from one place and one place only, and it's called the Treasury. Now, you can get into the Treasury because you're both smart enough. You've got to take a fast-track exam into the civil service, and then you opt for the Treasury. And there you will be one of the few people with real power of decision. So, T, you'd be given the job of, okay, go and sort out the bus system in Sheffield. Have you been to Sheffield?
I have. I watched a Justin Timberlake concert in Sheffield. I also, I know, right? I was like 13 or something, but I went with my sister.
Great. Did you get a bus? You've got real lived experience.
I did. I played basketball in Sheffield when I was playing like national basketball in Winchester, and we went to Sheffield on a coach on like the team bus, but I haven't used public transport in Sheffield.
Oh, well,
but I've been to Sheffield a couple of times.
You're clever enough to figure out what the bus routes should be in Sheffield, aren't you?
Yeah. No, you don't. Down. Give me a couple of hours, I'll map the whole city.
Don't. He will say yes.
How complicated can it be?
And indeed, a lot of the bright young kids in the Treasury, they do say yes because they're really smart. And that makes them very overconfident.
It's also a job for them to do, right?
Yeah.
It's just a chance to prove themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Overconfident, very smart kids who've passed all the exams, you'll plan the bus route better than any would do in Sheffield would do it. I mean, you know more than...
I know about London buses, and we've got complicated bus routes.
You know about buses. You've been on one.
Yeah.
So
I've seen a bus.
Drive past them.
So that's the crazy world where Andy Burnham...
the Manchester buses,
Andy Burnham has just got power over the Manchester bus routes. But as he said, Britain is actually run by about 50 people.
Yeah.
Those 50 people Treasury. Are basically in the Treasury, right? So that's the first bad news. But if you want to change things, get into the Treasury. Second thing is try what would you want to change in the Treasury? And I think the second thing you'd want to change is that sense of overconfidence. Right? Let's go back to our conversation that actually there's an element of luck here. Yeah, you're smart. Yeah, you're clever. Yeah, but you're not so smart that you don't need to learn anything.
Yeah.
If you're going to plan the bus routes for Sheffield, at least have the decency to go to Sheffield and ask people.
Yeah, you have to ask them, where do we need buses? Yeah. Where's the busiest place there? Where do most people work? Where's the most traffic? All these things, yeah.
So, frankly, the people of Sheffield might be even better at planning the bus routes in Sheffield than you.
I would assume, because they live there. Yeah.
Yeah. So the next thing you have to persuade your Treasury to do is to devolve some power of decision to local people.
Yeah.
You know, who should Sheffield bus routes be accountable to? Should it be you in the Treasury scrutinising things, or should it be local people in Sheffield who use buses?
Definitely.
And so devolve to local governments. The local governments, some will get it right, some will get it wrong, but those local governments need to be accountable to local people.
Yeah.
In Britain, that's just not true. Hardly anybody votes in local elections. Why? Because local governments have got no power of decision, no money. And so the Treasury says, well, these awful local governments, we will scrutinize, we will take the decisions instead. We will protect taxpayers from these awful local governments. Right? And of course, the local governments are awful because they've never had any power, never had any money, and nobody votes. We've got to break out of that cycle.
Yeah.
You give lots of examples of devolution that worked. One was there was 3 Russian powers. They were given decision control over their region, weren't they? And one got it right, 2 got it wrong.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, do you know who wrote that section?
No.
It was one of my students. I'm very proud. I teach a class of clever young people, mid-20s, mid-30s, in Oxford. And unlike most professors, I empower my students. And so...
you devolution in your class.
I do.
Yeah.
I do. I say, you know more about your place than I do. And so a couple of years ago, we had a Russian in the class. And I make my students, the exam I set them at the end is take 2 countries, one of which you know about, or 2 or 3 regions in the country you know about, and say why one worked and one didn't. And so this young Russian woman, that was her prize essay for my test. And then I worked with her and we produced together that piece of work. But it's bloody brilliant.
That's
really.
amazing.
Yeah.
But it seems kind of obvious for you to sit here and say people who live by the decision should make the decision almost. Yeah. Why is it not that way?
Because in Britain, we've got such clever people who are too confident. And so the Treasury staff think they know best. They've got a huge amount of power. They think of themselves as protecting us, but the Treasury staff are even more socially exclusive than the rest of the civil service. And believe me, that's saying something. Right?
Are they all from London?
They're nearly all from the southeast. Most of them went to good public schools, in other words, private schools. Then they went on to either Oxford or Cambridge. I had an interview with a rare permanent secretary who, yes, he'd been to a good private school. He'd gone to a good university, but not Oxford or Cambridge. And when he retired as permanent secretary of his ministry, he finally blew the whistle. He said, do you know, I was made to feel, even when I was a permanent secretary, I was made to feel an outsider.
Just because you didn't go to Oxford?
Because I didn't go to either Oxford or Cambridge. Now, if a permanent secretary who went to a good public school, went to a good university, if he feels socially an outsider...
What's the chance for the rest of everyone else?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's extraordinarily socially exclusive.
Is it diverse? Like men, women?
Depends what you mean.
Yeah.
Right? So the Treasury knew that it had to be diverse by gender. And so you name the gender, they've got it now. They knew they had to be diverse by ethnicity. And so they are. What they're not at all diverse in is either where people came from or what their lived experience is. And so the number of people in the Treasury with lived experience of life north of the Watford Gap in deprived areas, deprived communities, is negligible. Right? And that's the tragedy. We've got people overconfident, far too much power, who just don't have the life experience that's needed to understand why opportunities are so worse in lots of communities around the country.
You worked with the last government quite closely with their levelling up agenda, and
I did indeed. I was appointed I wasn't paid, of course, but I was appointed as the advisor on levelling up. And at first I thought, yeah, that's great. I'll do my best. I know something. I don't know everything, but I know some things about this stuff. That's why they appointed me. And then I realized that actually this Ministry of Levelling Up had no powers and no money. And so it was announced as the flagship program of Boris's government. That's what Michael Gove said, who was the Minister for Levelling Up. The flagship program of the government. The flagship didn't have any money. And so the ship never left port. There was nothing was done.
How much are you talking about in terms of spend? Do you know?
So the whole budget for Levelling Up was about 4 billion. 4 billion sounds a lot of money. The cost of the overrun of the Elizabeth line was 5 billion. Yeah. And that was quietly slipped by the Treasury, that 5 billion. So we start with 4 billion, right? Spread over 4 years, right? Billion a year. And then we discover that 90% of that money, which was allocated, has never been spent. 90% of it unspent. Why? Because the proposal, the system was that the local governments around the country could put in bids for how they would spend this 4 billion. And 90% of those bids was vetoed by the Treasury because it didn't trust them. And so we ended up with 400 million spread amongst the 50 million people plus. It's not very much money. In fact, the technical word for it is peanuts. And so this was a complete sham, is a word. It was the pretense of doing something. I compare it with a really successful program in which a region was financed to catch up. And this is East Germany after the reunification with West Germany. That happened in 1992. And the head of the German government at the time, called Kohl, was a conservative, like Boris, but he was absolutely serious about getting the East to catch up with the West. And so first thing he did was to say, well, this will take a generation. It'll take at least 30 years. So I won't be in power, nor my party for 30 years. So we have to make this a cross-party commitment. So from the very start, the commitment to enabling East Germany to catch up was endorsed by all the political parties. So it was cross-party. He didn't use it for party advantage. Did Boris do that? I don't think so. Right? Then he said, this is going to be big money for a long time. We're going to have to raise taxes. Did Boris say we got to raise taxes? I don't think so. Is Rishi Sunak, did he promise to raise taxes? I think not. He was all talking about tax cuts, right? So what did Kohl do? He said, we're going to raise taxes, and he raised them a lot. And he said, this has got to be a moral commitment. It's a moral duty of every West German to pay these taxes. It's a moral duty because we're all citizens of the new united Germany, and the successful people, us in the West, we've been lucky to be in the West. That wasn't a decision by us to be in the West. It was dictated by where the Allied armies, where the Russian armies stopped and the British and American armies started. That was an arbitrary line. We were in the lucky half of Germany. And so we've got a moral duty to support our less fortunate citizens. That was a moral duty. Is anybody saying that now? Is anybody saying to you in London, we've got a moral duty to help the left behind in the north? I don't hear it. Do you?
But do you think that would fly with Londoners? What's the incentive to do this beyond it's morally right?
Improve the economy.
I can understand why someone would go to me. Well, I don't really care about you, Damien. Like, I'm okay down here.
Are you happy with Brexit?
Not at all.
No.
Not at all, yeah.
Why did Brexit happen? Because every region of England, except London, voted in favour of Brexit.
Yeah.
Why did they do that? Because they were angry and despairing.
Yeah, and they wanted something better.
And they just then got sold a lie.
So they protested through this vote.
Yeah, it was a protest vote.
Yeah.
And who was the guy spinning the lie that, with Brexit, things will all be wonderful? It was a guy called Boris, right? So Boris sold a lie very successfully to all the regions of England other than the southeast. Who lost? The whole nation.
Yeah.
Including London.
Yeah.
Would it have been better if Londoners had, let's relive history, right? So it's now not 2024, it's, let's say, 2000, right? It's a long time ago, 24 years. Would it be better if you, alive then in London, had said, actually, we better stop this divergence of the north from the south
100%.
continuing?
100%. The country would be in a much better place. We'd probably still be in Europe.
We would be still in Europe, for sure, because it was shooting everybody in the foot, including, but most especially, the north of England.
Yeah.
The north of England actually exports stuff to Europe. London doesn't export that much stuff to Europe. It's a world centre. And so London was less affected by Brexit than the north of England. So the north of England shot itself in the foot because it was misled.
But that's because London didn't care enough to look after the rest of the country. So
a lot of the development in Manchester as well was European funding.
It's European Union structural funds. Unlike Britain, the European Union took seriously the fact that poorer areas were diverging from richer areas, and so it created a big fund called the structural funds, which was allocated exclusively to the regions that were falling behind. And that's why Manchester and much of the north of England got structural funds.
It's crazy the way that not in the EU, but Europe is doing more for Manchester and the north than the UK is.
It is crazy, isn't it?
It's like a broken system, but everyone's just happy to keep going on with it.
It is a broken system.
Do you think it will change with the new government?
I don't know. I'm not a fortune teller. But what we can do is set out practical agendas, hopeful agendas, which show how other places have recovered, and many other places around the world have recovered from being left behind, partly using their own initiative and partly using help, appropriate help, which doesn't come saying we know what to do. It comes with ears. We need more ears and less mouth by the centre, by London, and strategies which say, what would help you? What are your ambitions? What are you trying to do? And how can we help you do that? What will happen? At the moment, we've got city region mayors all around the country, and that's a good system. We can build on that. If the city region mayors were given more monies, more powers, then they would experiment. Some would be more successful than others, but they learn from each other. We could have a network of the mayors of city regions who would meet periodically and say, who's tried stuff that's working, who's tried stuff that's not. We can learn from failures, we can learn from successes. So it's not a matter even of teaching Whitehall from the north of England. It's a matter of, very often, of getting a network group of city region mayors who learn from each other. In the process, Whitehall will learn, but the basic lesson that Whitehall needs to learn is modesty.
That might take a while.
And we can characterize it as, look, I think I'm doing this, London versus England, like the rest. But is it actually that, or is it just this arrogance amongst elites?
It's the arrogance amongst the elites. Was it good for London that we got Brexit? Of course.
There's a lot of poor people in London as well, isn't there?
Yeah,
They could be listening to this going, I'm not loaded here.
Absolutely.
I'm not like doing well.
We go back to housing.
Yeah.
Are you going to get a house in London? No.
I'm going to tell you about today's video sponsor, Manual, from the privacy of my own studio, because T loves rinsing me about my hair, but actually he's having a harder time of it recently. When we first started filming the podcast, my hair was noticeably thinning. The difference from then to today has been a result of me using Manual consistently now for about 12 months or so. It's really easy. You just go onto the website, fill out the questionnaire, and they will send you clinically proven treatments for preventing hair loss straight to your front door. No need for an appointment or to even leave the house. Receding hairlines are something that millions of men are affected by, and there's no shame in going bald, if that's your thing. But I got a head shaped like a Cadbury's cream egg, so I'm fighting for every follicle. If you want to join the fight, then you can sign up using the link below, and if you use the code MM55, that's MM55 at the checkout, you'll get 55% off your first order.
Could we take a look at some of the examples where devolution has worked and what that's done to that economy? And because again, I get what you're saying about it's morally right, but I just think most people they're selfish to their nuclear family, rightfully so. Like, that's the way we are. We care about ourselves and we care about the kids we have. We don't really care about some abstract northerner,
No, we don't. We care about it. Yeah, we care about our own family first. We are, just let me counter that for a little bit. We have evolved through the fierce furnace of evolution, so that nearly all humans died out in that fierce furnace. When we came down from the trees and walked about on two legs, we weren't very well designed for what we encountered. Did we have protective scales? No. Did we have claws? No. Could we run fast?
I could.
Faster
than Damien, I can. Yeah. I'm faster than Damien.
Not by a cheater's standards.
Faster than a leopard?
No.
And so nearly all human communities died out in that fierce furnace evolution. The only communities that survived were the ones that learnt how to be pro-social within the community, how to help others within the community. And so we evolved to be the most pro-social mammal of the whole class of mammals, right? We're more pro-social than chimpanzees, more pro-social than any other mammal, right? Yes, we can be dragged down to be selfish and lazy and just concerned about our little family, but we're hardwired by evolutionary process to care for more than that, to care for a group, to support a group. And so we can be more pro-social than just me.
Cities are examples of that, aren't they? Massive collections of individuals all working together.
Absolutely. You can have a community not only in a place, but in a firm.
Yeah.
Bourneville the Cadbury's firm was a good example of a big firm that had people who had a sense of purpose beyond just making money for themselves, right? So they had pride and skill, but they also had a sense of being in a community of work. So we shouldn't be too pessimistic about saying we're all just greedy, selfish, lazy people. We can be dragged down to that if we are put on a bonus culture and rewarded for being a shit, or if we're completely despairing and just get frantic.
Like, I have no choice. Like, it's me and my family, or him, the guy next door, and I've got to take off his plate.
Yeah, the end of the world kind of stuff.
That's right. So we can be dragged down, but our more natural mode is to be raised up, not to be saints. Saints ain't on the menu in human life, right?
But working together.
But working together is, yes. And that makes us feel a lot better about ourselves. Mm-hmm. So you asked examples of where have people done that. And one example I like, since since we've got Spanish experience in our team, let's go to Spain, and let's go to the Basque region of Spain. Now, the Basque region of Spain, if we go back 40 years, was a dreadful mess. It was a post-industrial town where the industries had upped and left. So it was like Sheffield, like Pittsburgh.
Like the north of England.
Yes, like the north of England now. So it was desolate in that sense, but it was worse because it was bitterly divided. It's a very weird language, the language that the Basques speak. It's like no other language in Europe. And so there was a very strong Basque separatist movement that said, we don't want to be in Spain at all. So this was a bitterly divided place in an industrial wasteland. Do investors come to places which are conflict, violent-ridden industrial wasteland? No. So this was a place, whole region that was spiraling down. And then it started to spiral up. How did it do it? Not by good political leadership. That came later. It came up from a bottom-up movement, which had been founded by one pretty modest padre, as a Catholic priest, who'd gone to a small town when he was young, and that was his job. He was the padre there. And he felt this sense of what I need to do in this wreck of a town is create people who are pro-social, but know how to found businesses and grow them. So it's back to SME growth. And he spent years training a small team of people who could do that. Eventually he said, I've got 5 of you who are as expert as this now as I am. You 5 now start, you go, each of you found a business. And they did. And they all got this moral philosophy and all got these skills of what you've got to do is grow the business, but then spin it off so that we found another business. Some of us leave and do the same thing. That kept going. By now, it's one of the biggest companies in the whole of Spain. It's got 90,000 direct employees. It's a cooperative. And the businesses all around the Basque region keep coming together to found in common things that they need. They need training and skills. It's crazy if each business does all the training. So they've founded colleges of technology which do the training for all the young Basques in Spain. So that's a story of coming together. Bilbao is now, the whole of the Basque region is now pretty well the most prosperous region in the whole of Spain. It's been lifted up by that bottom-up process of long-term thinking, not the sort of short-termism of the Treasury, coming together, not the divide and rule north versus south, and the modesty of saying, we can't do it all in the Basque region. We're going to have to look out to others and bring something in. And that worked.
Yeah, and it's like there are regions, so they're not as competitive with each other in the same way that maybe Manchester and Liverpool, there's only 40-minute drive separates them. They might be able to collaborate. I mean, they did in the past, didn't they? Manchester processed the cotton, dug canals all the way to Liverpool and shipped it out, and both cities linked.
For heaven's sakes, and rather a long time ago, there was something called the Wars of the Roses, where Yorkshiremen fought Lancastrians. It's a very long time ago.
Yeah.
Maybe it's time that we realise that the whole of the North has been left behind, and only if we've got a common voice, and only if we don't say it's us against the South, but it's all of Britain against this absurd over-centralisation, short-termism that has dragged us from being a major economy to we're going down and down and down. We were, in the past, a place where if you were born in Britain, you said, yes, I'm born in the best place in the world. And now, if you're a youth born in Britain, unless you're in the lucky gilded minority, you say, I'm really anxious about my future.
Got a lot of disadvantages. Yeah.
So it's possible to be very much better than what we've been doing.
But you said that you worked with the people that had the power to fix that. They made a load of promises and then they put no money there. So do they just not care?
They weren't serious. And
you're talking about the previous government, so
yes,
Boris, Rishi Sunak, Michael Gove was the level up?
Gove was the person I knew best. I had a lot of respect for Gove until very near the end. But by the end, I think the only honest thing for Gove to have done, knowing that he'd got no money, no chance of levelling up, succeeding, the only honest thing for him to have done would have been to resign publicly, or at least threaten to do that and say, unless this is properly funded and a proper cross-party commitment built to do this, then I'm resigning, because it's a deception.
It's a farce, yeah.
Yeah, and he didn't do that. And so I lost respect for him. I think he connived at a deception. He was more loyal to his party than he was to the country.
You made the brave decision to step away from that, though, and you spoke out, didn't you?
I sure did, yes.
Yeah, even though obviously working with government, you're made to sign all sorts of things. So
yes, so
I just want to commend you for that.
I probably breached some.
I hope you're not going to get sued.
You signed NDAs or whatever, and you spoke out because
yes.
you felt so passionate about it.
Yes, because I felt my duty to the people of the country was much greater than my duty to this particular government and its agenda.
But what doesn't make sense to me is that if the Treasury, the government invests in the North, it's going to generate more revenue. And isn't that the money makes the world go on? Isn't that the aim of the government, to generate like GDP for the country?
You've forgotten the short-termism, right? It's got to pay off this year.
In the next 4 years
so that I
or
can
something.
get more
It's got
power.
to pay off this year.
Yeah.
Never mind this 4 years. It's got to pay off right now.
Yeah.
And it won't. Because this is a thing that'll take 30 years.
Yeah. There's
Start now. If we never start, do you know how long it'll take? Eternity.
Forever, yeah. How long did it take in the Basque region? Was it around 30 years?
Yes, it's a long time, of course. But these processes, you can crash a country pretty fast.
The building up is slower.
They're called the people who crash a place pretty fast. Think of Liz Truss, right? So you can drag a country, you can break a country really fast. Building it back up, there's nothing on the menu that says, "Oh, this is instant." Right? Of course, it will take time. If you don't start, it will take eternity. So get started. You have to ask the existential question: does this matter for our country or not? If it doesn't matter, then don't do it. Don't waste money on it. Does it matter that we've got a divided country that's spiraling down? My God, that is existentially important. That we've got masses of young people who are very anxious about their future. That we're just leaving people with no chance of a better life. This really existentially matters. We've got to have a country that works for all our young people. At the moment, it only works for a privileged minority.
Ask anyone in the North and they would say that investment in the North is important and that it's lacking. And they've tried to vote for that through voting for people through levelling up and the Northern Powerhouse and these ideas that were sold to them. And then there was just a lie to get power. So how does an individual really do any more than that?
It would be nice if we had a constitution, which of course we don't. It would be nice if we had the German constitution, which we certainly don't, although we helped to design the German constitution after the war. So Germany has the constitution, which we worked out in Britain, together with, for example, trade unions. British trade unions had a hand in designing the future constitution of Germany because we'd won the war. So Germany didn't design its constitution, we did it.
How does the constitution help?
Well, there's a law called the Basic Law, which says public spending on infrastructure per person has to be the same in every region of the country. Okay?
That seems like such a simple, logical rule.
Let's just process that. So what you're saying is that school spending isn't the same for kids everywhere.
It is.
That kids are treated unequally in the north.
Absolutely. And transport expenditure.
Yeah. You can see that clearly, the transport.
Have you heard of HS2?
Yeah.
I was about to bring it up. I'm like, wouldn't that be quite a quick return on investment? Because people can use, once it's built, obviously, if it ever gets built. But like once it was
cancelled.
Yeah, it's been cancelled. Yeah. But they might change their minds.
They salted the earth.
So you could have either said, okay, we're going to build a transport system like that. You could actually have, it was quite expensive. It was something north of 100 billion.
Yeah.
You could have said to the mayors around the country, if you had your share of this 100 million, you meet together, would you collectively say what we want is HS2? Right? If they'd met collectively and said, well, here we got 100 million between us, what's the best use? They might have come up with HS2, they might not. My guess is probably not.
They've probably got more pressing issues than getting to London and up north quicker.
Yeah. Right. But if you're faced with the choice HS2 or nothing,
you'll take
then
HS2.
Of course they say HS2. Is HS2 ever going to be built? Well, first they decided to build it just the leg from London to Birmingham, and then possibly on towards Manchester. Then, when they decided, oh, that's too much money, they decided, we'll just build it London to Birmingham. And then they decided, oh, God, when people in the home counties started to protest, they decided, oh, it's too expensive to do this. So the train as planned goes from Birmingham to nowhere. Not an awful lot of people want to go from Birmingham to nowhere or from nowhere to Birmingham. But the trains will be HS2 trains, which are these super high-speed ones that don't have many carriages and don't have many seats. But if you run them as far as Birmingham, then they have to continue on, but on the old railway lines, up to Manchester or up to Sheffield. But then they're much slower and have many fewer seats than the existing trains. So we've got if HS2 as planned gets built, it will reduce the train services anywhere north of Birmingham. They'll have less trains. Right? They don't have enough trains already.
The capacity is already terrible.
Yeah. So it'll be worse, it'll be slower, it'll be fewer seats, and it will cost about 50 billion. So this is truly crazy. Right?
Surely.
How on earth did we get that decision?
All these intelligent people that are making these decisions, shouldn't they have, like, anytime you take on a project, you like do a Gantt chart, you do like risks and rewards and strengths and opportunities. Like, how did they not run all the numbers, figure out all the logistics before they started, rather than you've already started building and then you're like, oh, wait a minute, this could be expensive. Oh, wait a minute, this is a problem.
So you take one decision one year, and then next year you take another decision. And so they've layered these decisions. So at the moment, we're talking, heaven knows what our new government is going to be doing about HS2. I hope it's going to be rethinking it. And probably the best thing at the moment is just to cancel the whole thing. If we spend 50 billion, we've already spent quite a lot, I should say. But if we keep on spending and finish with what's planned, it is ridiculous. So that is a spectacular example of very clever people who know nothing about train transport, taking what seems very good decisions year by year and ending up in something that is laughable. So the decision structure that achieved HS2, and it's the same sort of decision structure that has achieved a lot of other things, like you've heard of the post office scandal. Scandal after scandal after scandal of these crazy short-term decisions where no team across disciplines and across ministries and across places actually comes to review the decision, to forge a decision together.
You mentioned Labour, and I know Tamain already asked, but do you think Labour will be better at facilitating national conversation, discourse and decisions?
Well, they certainly won't be worse. One hopeful sign is that one of the cans that has been kicked down the road is a lot of local governments are financially underwater. They've been given a whole load of liabilities and no money to achieve them. Technically, that is the prerogative of the sucker, right? You're going to carry the can for failure. And so the mayors of these local governments are at the moment designed to carry the can for failure. But nearly all of them are Labour. And so my hope is that the Labour team in Whitehall will talk closely with the Labour teams in all the city region authorities, and they'll learn an awful lot by listening to their regional mayors. And the first thing those regional mayors are going to tell them is we need more powers and more money, not more obligations. So, yeah, I'm a little bit hopeful.
Do you see the bankruptcy of Birmingham as part of this then, where you're saying they're carrying
of course,
a can?
They're carrying the can,
yeah.
Yes. They're carrying the can. Now, to be fair, the mayor of the city region of Birmingham, Andy Street, was really very good. And he'd won a lot of respect. He lost by only 1,000 votes, which, given the disgrace of the Conservative Party, which was his label, is not surprising. But we need people like Andy Street. There's got to be a fight for the soul of the Conservative Party over the next 4 years. And I very much hope it's won by people like Andy Street and not by people we won't name.
Could you put a number? I mean, if the IFS put a number on how much money that needs to be spent in the north, you had a budget of 4 billion, you only got 400 million.
So 4 billion was peanuts. I mean, the budget for Germany to enable East Germany to catch up was 70 billion euro per year.
Inflation
every year.
70 billion a year.
70 billion a year for 30 years. This is big money. They had a big institution called KfW, which had 7,000 people working in it, all devolved to the cities in East Germany. So they was devolved, and they were hugely well financed, and they were spending money in the regions, in the cities that mattered, learning how to do it with the regions. So a city like Dresden, which was a train wreck, recovered over the 30 years. Some other cities that had their money spent the money less well, and so took longer to recover. That's inevitable in a devolved system. Not everybody's going to do the same thing, but you do learn rapidly. And that process of learning rapidly through doing things differently in different places is a very important principle that is anathema to Whitehall. Whitehall wants to come up with, we know the solution and we're going to impose it everywhere at once. And that's a recipe for getting things wrong and never learning.
Do you think we have the ability or the potential in the UK to do a long-term project which goes across different parties or different governments for like 30 years, how would they work together, like Labour and Conservatives working together on a long-term project?
Why can't
because
it do that?
It's like
we had it in the past. If we go back to the 1950s, that was an era which is colloquially known as Buttscallism, because Butler was the Conservative, Gaitskell was the Labour leader, and they worked together with a very similar philosophy. Buttscallism was a cross-party set of ideas. And so we once did it in the 1950s. We can get back to those habits of doing things together. We don't have to stand at the dispatch box in Parliament and rubbish the other party.
It's if we're following America, and it's just put all the dirt and smear on the other party. Exactly. And so then you can't imagine the Democrats and the Republicans working together because they hate each other so much. So it kind of feels like we're going in that direction, but not as intense yet.
But in the past, America, there was a lot of cross-party support. Yeah. A lot. So America was the classic example for years, decades, of the parties working together to fix problems.
We've got the cities that we could test it in. Just up north, you could name 5, 6 big cities that you could have different approaches, and it sounds great, but 70 billion. I mean, net zero is meant to cost 50 billion a year for 20, 30 years, isn't it? So where is that money going to come from?
Okay, so if we can, believe it or not, it will come from something called taxes. And remember, that's what Chancellor Kohl explained to Germans. This is going to cost real money, and so we're going to have to raise taxes. He called it the solidarity tax.
That's a good name.
And it was a good name for a good cause. Right? We have to show solidarity with the people who've been left behind. And by God, the people of East Germany had been left behind. At the time of unification, East German productivity was only 20% of West German. Now it's 85%. I work with Germans a lot. They think it's a failure because it's still only 85%. I say, you stopped just a few years too soon. You should have kept going, because getting from 20 to 85% is a big success.
Yeah.
East Germany, when it unified with West Germany, productivity was much lower than South Yorkshire. Now it's much higher. So whatever was being done in East Germany really, really worked. And whatever's been done in South Yorkshire, to South Yorkshire, I should say, whatever's been done to South Yorkshire, because
nothing's been done in it. Yeah.
It really, really hasn't worked. So could we please learn from other places that managed to achieve this catch-up?
But what about things, the cost of living? The tax rate's probably the highest it's been since World War II, and the current tax rises that are implied in terms of fiscal drag, freezing of tax bands for the next 3 years, are just enough to balance the books. There's no extra money there, so it's going to be a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow.
Let's have a look at some of these tax rates, right?
Yeah.
In the 1950s, 60s, 70s, the top tax rate on income was, I think, 83%. Top tax rate on income now is 45%, but actually there are a lot of loopholes, so that, if you're running a private equity firm, your top tax rate is much lower than the 45%. If you're running a venture capital firm, you have what's called carried interest. And carried interest is gains which are again taxed much lower than 45%. So the British tax system is full of loopholes that means some very rich people end up paying very little. You can, if you're rich enough and you can pay good enough lawyers, you can pass on your money to your children pretty well tax-free.
Yeah. Bit of farmland and some other things.
Yeah, exactly. They're also, the likes of us it's unaffordable.
So when you're saying tax, you talk about taxing the rich or closing loopholes, because I think the middle earners find that a hard message to swallow. Of you need to pay more tax.
Absolutely, because the middle earners
struggling as
I
it is.
get paid well by academic standards.
You're not rich then.
But I'm not rich. But my marginal tax rate on my salary from the black school in Oxford, my marginal tax rate is 60%.
Yeah.
So I'm a middle earner that's paying 60%.
One of the tax traps.
Yes, I'm in one of the. That's right. And then I was the last academic to buy in my street. My street is a fancy street now. It's full of Maseratis and things like that. Those guys are probably on a couple of million a year, and their marginal tax rate is probably pretty low, and they've already designed it so that their children will inherit it all tax-free.
Yeah.
So that's the bitter reality.
This is what people want to hear. You're basically saying the solution to the problem is to tax people who are avoiding tax-free loopholes, and that you think that there's enough money within that sphere to fund.
Yes.
It's
certainly
not
to get going.
It doesn't need to be VAT, income tax, or national insurance.
No. There's plenty of places where we can close loopholes.
Council tax would be nice, I say, because all those big houses in Mayfair that pay the same as a
absolutely
three-bed semi.
Preposterous. We last valued houses in 1992.
Yeah.
Which is preposterous.
I mean, you see the movement now in terms of taxing the rich. We had Gary Stevenson on, and he's generated a massive following from that message. So when I heard you say we need to raise tax, I was thinking, people are not going to like to hear income tax, but the fact that you think there's enough money there, that you've done the research and within the richer cohorts, to get started, like you said, not 70 billion.
Let's get started for the next 5 years, do that.
Yeah.
And then see. It may be that we need to raise some of the major taxes, but in that case, if you've got enough to show for the first 5 years, then
people will be more willing to accept it.
Can be honest and say,
here's some results.
Yeah.
The productivity's gone up, GDP growth.
And again, Left Behind is full of examples where people in other places managed to make an agenda of we're going to pay more tax popular. It was a vote winner because they tied that extra tax to real things that real people wanted.
Yeah.
It feels like everyone knows what the right thing to do is. It's the politicians who don't. I've got my eye on the time because I know you've got some important places to be after this, but I could listen to you talk about this all day, honestly.
The politicians are too scared of the voters, but you get voters that you get the voters you deserve. So our politicians really do need to learn how to communicate well and then speak truth.
Yeah.
That's a great place to end it.
Damo, what's happening? What's new?
So last week I did something pretty interesting. I went into a business and had a chat to their staff around, personal finance.
What would you talk about?
The main thing was the auto-enrollment work-based pension. 90% of people stay in the default fund, which might not be the best thing for their finances, and is a really simple thing that people can change if they just understand a bit about what's going on.
Nice. How do people get your skills and learn a bit more?
Well, it's funny you should ask that to me. They can find a load more details below, or it's will@getmost.co.uk. You know what? We should include this at the end of the episode. Nice.